Hello, my fellow readers. This is Dark Symphony 777 with another fan fiction review. As always, link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe. Oh, excuse me. Subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story, and finally, this is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of our own world, so please respect that. So, the story I'm doing a review on is the A-Mei-Zing OutBack Adventure. Nice use of pun. It is written by Funky. I legit just noticed the name Mayhem. Slow Cop. Peak Slow Cap. And it is an Overwatch fanfiction. Now, I gotta say this. I'm not too familiar with Overwatch. I know of the game. Like, I think it's like one of those games that like everyone kind of knows about. When it came out in like 2014, 2015. Damn, Overwatch is like over a decade old, and most people only still care about the porn. But I know a little bit about Overwatch, not a lot, but I know that Overwatch has like a lot of like really cool ideas, but like that Blizzard just refuses to do anything with, because it's like, no, we're just gonna keep this like PvP. Oh, PvE? Nah, we promised that we're not gonna do it from like Overwatch 2, and I know like some of the characters. I even played Overwatch one time when I was a kid. Kid is like in my 20s. Damn, that's still old. And I remember like kind of liking it, but then again, I'm not a big fan of like PvP games. That's just me. But I remember getting like a single kill with Zentreya, and it's like, that's it. It's like, all right, I killed someone. That's I like my day with that. But yeah, this is sort of a weird, a weird situation with a story where I kind of like certain aspects of it, but there's like one really big aspect of it that kind of really that does not sit well with me. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So, what is the plot about? Okay, well, the plot is basically Mei-Ling Zhou. Mei-Ling Zhou! There's only one Mei-Ling for me, and that's this Mei-Ling. Best Mei-Ling. never a dull opportunity to shout out Toho. I had to. Okay, so the plot is basically Mei-Ling Zhou. I'm pretty sure I butchered that name. Is very bored, and she's kind of figure out something to pass the time, and she hears a bunch of explosions outside that is made by a guy named Junkrat, otherwise known as Jameson Fox. The nerds inadvertently call that Fox is just going to be why. Okay, so Fox is basically doing like his own version of the 10 gun, the gun salute where you fire where military men fire the gun in honor of like military men. It's like what happened at my grandfather's funeral month in December. And he's basically doing this sort of like his own weird version of the 10 gun salute in honor of like an incident that happened back in his home in Australia, where a specific town basically got destroyed by what is called an Omnic storm. I don't know much about Omnics. I just know I don't know about the storm thing or like Australian climate and Overwatch. Omnics are basically what they call robots in the Overwatch world. That's what it is. And the storm was bad enough that it killed a lot of people, so he's basically just doing this as like a memorial, like his own version memorial sort of deal. And May decides to, why doesn't anyone have like a warning for them? It's like, well, no. It's like, do you think anyone has any way of tracking these storms? And May's like, idea. Goes and asks Winston for approval of the mission. The mission being she's gonna build these sonars. She's gonna bring them to the heart of Australia. She's gonna plant them in an area where there's safe enough space, and these sonars are going to act as storm radars. You know how like all meteorologists have like all these storms that basically track like hurricanes and typhoons to gauge like destruction capabilities and wind. So that's May's basically doing the same thing, but for these omnic storms specifically for Australia. And she goes, I'm gonna bring Junkrat and Roadhog because they're from Australia, so it helped to be able to find out anything that goes on with that. Anything that happens, they'll be able to whip me up. They'll be able to teach me how everything works. She manages to convince Winston to let her go, but she only gives her 2 weeks. Okay, this is not a good. This is not a priority mission because fuck Australia. So says Harambe. But I'll give you 2 weeks because your burden is not really anything I can have you do. So it's like, fuck, go ahead. All 3 of them go to Australia. They get this whole deal set up. They got the Junker friend of Junkrats. Junkrat gets killed by a prank trap. It's like, hey, you nearly blew my head off. Hey, and they set off. And basically, the first half of the story is quite literally just May, Roadhog, and Junkrat just basically going through the Australian outback and kind of getting into like some wacko shenanigans involving like Junker customs and all that. And I thought, hey, that's actually pretty interesting. Like it's a romantic comedy of like May having to deal with Australian customs, where Overwatch really doesn't like the hangout. They apparently neither Overwatch nor Talon really likes to do anything in Australia, as far as I'm aware. They could be doing something. I don't know. But they're basically just trying to avoid the outback as much as they can because of like everything, because of all the Omnic storms and stuff like that. But it's like, okay, they're gonna go to the heart of the outback, plant these machines, get out, probably get into like some random shenanigans, maybe like probably get like hit by an Omnic storm or something like that, which does happen. They inadvertently trashed the car, which was basically a lemon, and May manages to survive, get her, Roadhog, and Junkrat alive by freezing them all solid. They get frozen solid for about 4 months, and then they find out they have they have radiation poisoning. Well, mainly May realizes she has radiation poisoning. Roadhog and Junkrat, they're more resistant to it because because their bodies are more just generally used to it because of like the whole poison thing. Like if you're injected with like levels of poison, you gain like a resistance to it. Same thing with radiation, I'm guessing in this case. And they get holed up in a little safe house that was owned by Roadhog, who basically is like, okay, we're gonna recoup here for a little bit, and try and have something to eat, and then get a way to communicate with Overwatch and get them to come back. They do manage to get in contact with Winston. Winston's justifiably just upset because, like, hey, you went missing for 4 months. What in the actual hell? And then also accuses May of having Stockholm syndrome. Now we'll actually come back to Stockholm in a bit because it's actually relevant to the part where I don't like about the story, but bear with me. May managed to convince Winston, I don't have any of that. Then along the way, that she falls in love with Junkrat and all this. They managed to set up a situation where Overwatch comes to Australia, and about 2 days after the communications happen, they have to work really fast to get the Roadhog fixes up his bike. They get all three of them get on and go to the rendezvous. There's a literal Junker army nearby surrounding the boat because it's like, hey, free materials, come here. And they basically, a bunch of hillbillies nearly overpower the collective power of Overwatch. And it's insanity. They're like fighting to get inside the orca and all that. And they manage to get home. The orca's completely, more or less, heavily damaged, but that's not relevant. And the story kind of ends with them returning home and recovering from the radiation poisoning. Where even like I think it's implied where if they stayed in the outback a little bit longer, they legitimately would have just died from the radiation poisoning. May was almost on death's door, pretty much, because she's lost like a weight, lost all her hair. She was like her organs were actually starting to fail, so it's like it was like very harrowing and all that. And they basically just have a little happy ending. Here's my thing with this plot. I like the whole shenanigans, like the whole idea of this ecological like pseudo pacifist vegetarian chick going to like this crazy backwards Australian outback where she's so far out of the element because she's trying to do a legitimately good thing, and is kind of just having to deal with figure out the local customs because of how twisted it is. If you get all the radiation stuff and trying to deal with those situations, that's okay. That's kind of like one of these road trip type plots. You see them all the time. I think like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles would be an example. And I think those usually are good. Yeah, they're usually funny. And I think the first half of the story is very well done. The issue is everything from, I think, chapter... I think around chapter 14, chapter 14, 13 to the end is nowhere near as interesting and good as is the first half. Mainly coming down to the romance between May and Junkrat. So here's okay. So I don't have a problem with the romance. It's like, okay, fine. You make it very clear. Right here that they're gonna fall in love. I don't have a problem with that. Like doing the romance, I don't have a problem with that. And I think fine. It's a rom com. It's eventually gonna fall in love. Like who else is gonna fall in love with Roadhog? Okay. But the problem I have with the romance, it's not so much the romance itself, it's more how it comes across in context. Like, if you read this, if I describe how the romance work in the story, people would be like, huh? They would be justifiably kind of disgusted. Going back to where was the story? Yeah, right here. Going back to when May recontacts Winston 4 months after they freeze and they get out and they get to the safe house. Winston accuses May of having Stockholm syndrome. So, for those you don't know what Stockholm syndrome is a sort of brainwashing where captives of like a criminal or kidnapping, murder, or something like that, they gain feelings for their victim, for the person who is hurting them. It's a sort of like weird, twisted sort of deal. It was actually the term actually comes from the city of Stockholm, Switzerland, I believe. No, Sweden. Stockholm, Sweden, where there was a bank robbery in the 1970s, and a group of criminals they hold up in this bank for like sick for like a week, and they eventually met, and they had to work. They had to do like a big sort of deal where they had to work with the guy, do negotiations with the guy and the guy's brother, and they got and he had like he had like several hostages, but when the cops got the hostages out, and instead of like thanking them, the hostages actually started raising money to free the criminal, saying that they treated him better than the cops were treating them. It's a weird form of brainwashing. It's very disturbing, and in this story's context, when you have this normal girl who falls in love with Junkrat. And Junkrat in the story is very openly borderline creepy in his presentation. Like, I know enough about Overwatch that this is he is acting in character, but it still comes off as very creepy. It still comes off as mildly disturbing. The fact that his whole personality is he's very obsessive towards May in terms of like infatuation. Like he fluctuates from a very creepy sort of infatuation to like a very benign infatuation. Like there's times where he's like, oh, he's running off his mouth and he says like incredibly crude things, and it comes off as very off-putting. But other times he's respecting May's distance, he's respecting May's personality, and he gels more with her in terms of like personality. It's a sort of like schizophrenic behavior that kind of fits Junkrat as a character. Again, I'm not saying that that he's out of character or anything like that. He's perfectly in character. I'm just saying how it's presented. This is very much a issue that is more presentation than like anything content wise, because I know what the author is trying to do. He's trying to keep him as much as he can in character. It's just the presentation of it all just really is off-putting to me. When going back to this scene, they, May and Winston are communicating. He asks Winston, "Was the door locked?" Because he immediately caught on to the idea that, okay, someone I cared for, I was friends with for a long time, who was frozen for 10 years, because part of May's backstory is that she was cryogenically in stasis for like a decade. Goes missing for 4 months with these two people that are really more mercenaries than like actual official members of Overwatch. Then Junkrat comes in, starts smoozing up, and she starts liking it. So yeah, Winston has complete, utter justification for immediately cotton on to the idea that, hey, maybe she might have Stockholm. And reading through this entire story, it really, really does look like a form of Stockholm. Not so much May's getting Stockholm from interacting with Junkrat. More May is getting Stockholm from like all the shit that's happening in Australia in general. Like she's getting Stockholm syndrome from just the culture, and it's like that is very creepy, and that really sounds like a whole sort of horror vibe, like a sneaky horror vibe to the whole thing. I did think the idea is like, okay, getting Stockholm from from a culture itself, not so much from Junkrat, but more culture, the Junker culture as a whole, because of just how opposite it is from like everywhere else in the world where May is used to. It's just it's like an extreme form of culture shock. It's like, hey, that's actually not a bad idea, but the way that mentality comes with Junker's personality and Junkrat's character. I don't know why I said Junker instead of Junkrat. Junkrat's personality of like his whole like switching between like very benign and very obsessive, it really kind of pushes the envelope, I think, a little bit over the deep end without like at least if it was addressed, like maybe like Roadhog called out Junkrat's behavior is like, hey, don't act like that, because Roadhog's more benign. I know, again, it's more a case of like the author is making them in character, so I understand why the author is writing them the way they are. This is how they act in canon. But this is like a very, very easy case story of why you shouldn't keep a character 100% in canon, depending on the circumstances of the plot. Does that make the whole romance angle bad? No. I do think the romance is there. I just think I just honestly think the presentation is just way off. It's just honestly a bit off-putting. Also, I'm not a fan of like romance that just skipped straight to the sex, because I think they have sex right here. Thing. No, right here. They basically have sex like 2 chapters in a row, right here and here. And it's like, I'm personally not a fan of romance that just skip, like, okay, instead of like going for like the flame, it's just and building up the sex, and it just goes like, no, we're just gonna have the sex right away. That fuck urgency, fuck building up, fuck having like a satisfying payoff. We're just gonna have raw hot dog sex. And yeah, you can probably justify it as like them realizing the possibility that they're not going to, that they might die, because at the very least they all kind of realize they have radiation poisoning. So it's like they're all, so it could be like an act of like, oh, what if I got to lose? But that's just not for me. Character wise, I do think all the characters are interesting. I like how May, Junkrat, and Roadhog work together. Roadhog being like the steely, sane guy of the group. Junkrat being like the incredibly insane wanker that always talks in Australian slang and runs his mouth. And May kind of being like the middle person between the two extremes, where sometimes she becomes just slightly less insane than Junkrat, but she also keeps like the stoic and the emotional side. It's a good dynamic, and I think the author did a really good job of establishing that dynamic, as well as like making them come across like the whole adventure into the outback is like a bonding adventure for them, and make them come across as like actual friends. And, like the small details of like Roadhog trying to like talk to May and asking her if you're pulling Junkrat along because because of the possibility you might die. I think that's a really nice touch that touches upon Roadhog. I don't really know much about Roadhog. Then again, I don't know much about most of the characters. I just know enough that I know. Again, these characters are very much canon personality. I just think personally, I think you could have just toned down Junkrat's obsessive behavior towards Mai just a bit, or at least try to But I understand where you might be coming from, like the whole the balancing act between insanity and like the obsessive, and like trying to keep his balance. And there's a really tight tread walk you have to do with crazy characters. And I think, yeah, the author did good enough with Junkrat. And it's just, again, it's more that was more the whole romance thing's a presentation issue rather than like anything that's really negatively impacting the story. Grammar wise, there are some grammar errors near the end. Not really, but they're so far into the story and they're like very infrequent that there's like, don't really big deal. I think the sentence structure is good. The pacing it could have been a little slower paced. There is room that you could have made the story longer, trying to do like more ideas um, for like junker culture and stuff like that, and also the Australian outback. You could have even made a joke about like, oh, Australia is known for one thing: spiders. Yeah, spiders. How bad were the spiders? And you see like a kaiju size spider chasing after them. It's like that big. You definitely that definitely could have been room for like a spider joke somewhere in there at least. Funny thing, I saw like a bunch of like AI pictures, like, oh yeah, AI countries is like boss fights, and every time they get to Australia, it's always a spider. It's always a spider, and it's like, well, none of these are right except for Australia. There's always gotta be fucking spiders. I just find it funny. Uh, I think, but going back to the pacing, um, I think the pacing is good. It could have been, like I said, could have been slower, but I think it's good enough that I don't have that. Nothing really bad. Would I recommend the story? Uh, the romance is not going to be for everyone, mainly because of the whole underlying tones of it. Like I get that, but I do think if you work past that, it's like this is an enjoyable story. It's not a like top tier, but I do think it's entertaining enough, and I don't really and the characters are good. The plot for the most part is good. Um, and I think overall it's a great story, not amazing, but I think it's worthy enough that I would recommend it. Favorite part, I would actually honestly have to say the mental image of like this. Hold on, this absolute unit of a man, this big buff man with God and the giant hook, and he's knitting with Anna. It's like, oh, that's and like and the idea is like he's really just there to keep Junkrat from like doing insane shit because he's kind of just getting lumped with Junkrat. He's like, and even then, like Junkrat's like, okay, you took my arm, you took my leg. I'm not out of options. I'm gonna strap rockets to a wheelchair. Whoop! And then gets tranked. I just think that mental image is funny enough. And I do think a lot of the jokes at the beginning with like May and Winston, like they're staring at each other and they both like tilt up their glasses simultaneously. It's like, oh, we're both four eyes. Monkey blinks first. I did think some of the comedy is better. What would I change? Honestly, I would think to make the story a bit longer, a bit slower paced, kind of give more breathing room to the romance, so that way you can at least kind of try to edge off the inherent creepiness. I mean, you could make it more obvious um that May's like changing behavior, like slightly going to say is more of a result from the culture shock than anything else. Maybe show a little bit more love on like how junker culture works in general. Because I don't think that's kind of underutilized because like they built like a whole thing besides, oh, if it's not the storms, it's gonna be like the crazy people. It's like, do you think maybe you could have had more the story a bit longer to work on to have more in depth on the culture? I get why, because this story was made in 2017, and I don't think, and there really wasn't much on Australia and the lore at the time. Could be wrong, but I do think this is a solid but unspectacular story overall. So that has been my review of the amazing Outback Adventure. This has been Dark Symphony 777, and cut.